Welcome back to the plenary, everybody. I followed Jeff's example and I went to all of the breakout groups for a short time, each one, of course. And I found that there were excellent presentations and also very rich discussions. So I'm sure it will not be easy to summarize all this in about 7 minutes, but let's try. So we will be having the reporting back from 5 breakout groups, breakout sessions. And the sessions, each session received the 4 questions like the previous breakout groups. Identify areas where progress has been made in recent years. Highlight gaps in knowledge as new priority research needs. Give example of cross-sectoral partnerships, outline innovative approaches to add value to delivery of health and nutrition outcomes. So, the presentations will be made. We start with group number 6, Science, Technology and Partnership, and Andreas Blüthner, the coordinator of session 6, will do the reporting. Please.
Thanks so much. Well, we had a very lively discussion, being, I would say, truly multi-stakeholder from the audience and the presenters. We had 2 small and medium-sized enterprises, one in the area of analytics, one of the area of food production from Togo. We had GAIN, a big foundation, being per se a partnership approach, and we have also the academic side and NGOs in the audience. So that was the setup. I mean, 3 interventions or approaches that work. I think that's not fair. I mean, there's first of all not a silver bullet, so saying one thing that can fix the nutrition problem, and there's definitely more than 3 approaches that are working. And so I would leave it with the point that in nutrition, it has been proven that dietary diversification, including the agricultural approaches, is definitely working in certain areas cost effectively and sustainably. There is a space for fortification, so adding micronutrients to staple food. And I would also add supplementation and home fortification in cases of emergency and very specific target groups is also an approach that works. And I think where has been progress is to overcome those silos that supplementation people, often being doctors, I mean thinking in terms of treatment, giving people capsules, fortification people being partnership people working with industry, and agriculture and dietary diversification people having again a different mindset because there is connections. And sometimes solutions are stronger if they're really connected, and this is something that has improved over the last 10 years as far as I can see, but there's a major potential to further improve in that regard. So how can we really make an agricultural nutrition value chain produce more and better foods? So what are the gaps? The list of the gaps is even longer than the list that have of those things that have worked, because we wouldn't have 2 billion people being micronutrient deficient if all things work without any gaps. To be quick on that, and we sketched that out in more detail in the paper, I mean, there's a lack of data in terms of where are those micronutrient deficiencies and which population groups at what level. Seasonalized, not seasonalized. There's gaps in the dissemination of tools that really work. So often there is a thing that works, like a method to assess from the food intake the micronutrient status and the gap to the recommended daily intake, developed by University of Hohenheim. Who knows about that? Not many people. So there's a range of things here in the audience, I think, that should be made available up to the extent it really works and delivers cost effectively. Partnerships, partnership capacity works on the one hand side, still is a gap. So how do I find the right partner to amplify what I'm doing, to complement what I'm doing, and how do I scale up partnerships? I mentioned the silos, but I think a big learning also was today in the value chain approach we took. If you think about nutrition solutions, start from looking at the plate. So what do the people actually buy? And I mean, still, if they are not buying it, the market failure that is underpinning a nutritious food not ending up at the plate of the people that need it can be fixed. But be aware, if it's a very rare crop you try to promote, this is definitely an uphill battle against a market force, which consumers are saying, well, I want to have crystal clear edible oil, and to change that perception to make them eat red palm oil, which is maybe having a different taste and different color, this is truly a steep uphill battle. So what can be done then to make those foods maybe more nutritious, which is less an uphill battle because it piggybacks on something the people want. Again, it can be changed, the market forces, but consider that before entering in the long-term, maybe massive resource project, is something like that being bought, because only a small share of the food is donated. So like it or not, the people are buying it, and that should be taken into consideration. There have been partnerships that works, and GAIN is full of examples of partnerships. Also BSF has quite done some. So we mentioned in Bangladesh, macronutrient sachets distributed with an NGO in a women entrepreneurial model to reach out to target groups in rural Bangladesh. We have with GIZ the SAFO project, Strategic Alliance on Fortification of Edible Oils, that has delivered. But there's also failures out there of partnerships that consume time, maybe too many partners being involved, the mechanics not getting right, not distinguishing between a platform approach where many partners exchange on something pre-competitive or something very operational where you go with 1 or 2 or 3 partners into a specific problem. And this is still a gap in terms of the capacity of the organizations to partner with their right complementary partner, and that's a process to really develop that. In terms of innovation, I mean, financing is still a gap. I should mention that for agriculture and for nutrition people, because nutrition is not a hard investment. So banks in Africa love extractive industries maybe to finance that, but not nutrition. So I think the financing or institutions thinking about small and medium-sized grants, 250,000 to 500,000, this is still something that can really boost the sector. Innovation, what is really innovative? I think there are many innovative things out there, but I'm personally not a great fan of judging on whether something is innovative or not. I mean, the market or the demand will show whether an innovation can be scaled. I'm a greater fan to see how can we find out what works in what sphere, what is cost effective and scalable, and innovative to me, to some extent, also with a view to the donors, would be to keep going with things that work. So rather than always looking for the next innovative thing that can be sold maybe to a donor community, look into something that is replicable and scalable, and don't get tired to implement it unless the problem is fixed. And we have seen a test kit for vitamin A that costs a tenth of the regular tests. I mean, that needs to be everywhere where things cannot be measured, and it's not getting boring unless it's there. So this would be my call for innovation. I mean, replicate and scale what works. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sticking to the time. The breakout session number 7 was on facilitating research uptake, and Christine O'Kali will be reporting on this one. Thank you.
I would just apologize for the coordinator of the group. Miriam has had to leave, and so I'm standing in for her. This is not an excuse, but we did actually got into a heated discussion towards the end, and no one was willing to let it go. So I'm afraid that we were a little less organized than some. We certainly don't have overheads. I'll do my best to, and I was the last speaker, so I've assembled my thoughts on how it all went, and I have notes, but not going to go through everything. Our group was, our presentations were quite diverse, even though there were 4 of us. We started with an excellent piece by Stuart Gillespie, who has been engaged in with a fellow, I believe, on evaluating what's out there in terms of evaluations, assessments, serious assessments of around empowerment and nutrition, and then at a general level, and then specifically in particular programs he looked at whether he could say anything different that was new, new thinking around programs that were cash transfer programs. He looked at agricultural programs and one other, and I'm looking for the sheet. Basically, around specific interventions, such as cash transfers to women and so forth, whether these encouraged or facilitated empowerment, they found no evidence of links between very specific programs, whether this was agriculture or actually microcredit even, and the third one being the whole issue of, what was it, agriculture, what was the third one? Sorry? Cash transfers, yes, into the hands of women. And it wasn't a comparison of cash transfers versus non-cash food. It was just cash transfers. Did it really have any impact on women's empowerment? So the first session was all about women's empowerment. Can we measure it? First, can we measure it? Then, can we say anything about the way it impacts on nutrition? And then whether it is enhanced by any of these programs. And of course, we're talking always about women's empowerment. We apparently have a world of empowered men. But we are talking about women's empowerment, and everybody is aware of that. And one of the purposes, it became a purpose of the group almost, was to question to some extent whether this was a viable enterprise. It's an enterprise that everybody has adopted, and we're very clear about that. It's not just donors, it's development agencies, and it's even researchers. But they reviewed, I think it was something like 2,000 pieces of work published, and selected 180 that even bothered to even do any assessment of any kind. And certainly against these three indicators of how programs can actually enhance women's empowerment, there was no proof established in none of those three cases. In terms of women's empowerment and nutrition, not a lot, some sign, but very specific situations and under very specific circumstances. So also not much to support our continued pursuance of this. Maybe he's very clear that this might be because of the study design, but equally they did enough work looking at enough studies to conclude that whatever it was in the nature of empowerment, it was very difficult to track it and then to pinpoint actual links with our nutrition objectives. We then had a couple of presentations that were really about projects in the field. On one of them, it was really about a specific foundation, the Helen Keller Foundation. And they had a wide range of things that were going on in the community. They were not questioning any of these things, whether equity, empowerment, whatever it was. And I guess one of the key messages from that presentation was that change happens slowly, and that they were interested in small shifts, cumulative change, rather than seeking dramatic shifts. And maybe that's been discussed already today, I think, that maybe we're looking for the wow factor, and maybe looking for the wow factor is not really what we should be doing. Especially since they were not just looking at nutrition. They were also seeking empowerment, worked with both women and men to discuss how in the community everyone would benefit more from more discussion and arriving at strategies to deal with issues that were pointed out by the people in the communities as a problem. And the second project paper was really, a lot of projects were being looked at and not assessed, particularly, and we asked a question around that at the end. So apparently they have a lot of data huge database, and they're going to assemble that database. So we were shown 15 programs, something like that. And in the end, there was a lot of detail, clearly a lot of action, the UN agency involved, and very much around agriculture and nutrition. It was somewhat less around the empowerment. So a lot of detail on even smart agriculture and what difference will that make. So dealing with all kinds of issues, but in fact diversity was a central core that I think those programs were looking at. By increasing crop diversity, can we get a more diverse diet and through that arrive at better nutrition? And then there was me. And I advocated a change again in the way we think about gender, and I advocated a change in the way in which we arrive at maybe the change of change, and how we establish a different way of thinking. If we change the way we think about gender, then we can change the way we think about the change of change, and who is involved and who is not involved. And I argued my case first, and then I moved to suggesting using two different frameworks that I've been involved with others in establishing over the past 5-6 years, and as how to really rethink this whole thing. There was some concern expressed by the whole group that this might be problematic, but in the end we all agreed. So we all agreed, which I think is recent progress, that we do need to stop emphasizing women as the center of all programs and women as delivering all these things that we want to achieve. I suggested, and we all agreed, and it came out a little during discussion, that indeed that focus maybe should shift to households and should shift to social relations and thinking about those. And there was some concern that this would be impossible if we did this to really do much about nutrition. 1 minute, all right? We talked about, that was considered to be recent progress for us, that lots of people, both donors as well as researchers, were very much interested in this idea. And we'll go ahead together. Knowledge gaps, huge knowledge gaps, particularly on even households. We do not enter households. It's like we've got the black box back that was always there. Households were always talked about the black box. They sit in lots of diagrams as the place you do not enter. And indeed, we don't even really know how they work. Or we have decided how they work, and we're not willing to counter that decision. We need to be much more questioning, interrogating our standard assumptions. And every time we do anything, establish a hypothesis, we should be very clear that the hypothesis relates to something that exists and not some superwoman or household that we never see. One man, one woman, and maybe 2 children, preferably 1 girl and 1 boy, just to make it all work. And we've seen those pictures outside clinics. They're almost always one of each, and they're almost always one husband and 1 wife. And in sub-Saharan Africa, where we ended up, we fell into sub-Saharan Africa, huge differences in household types. And the focus on explaining what is going on, a focus on explaining the outcomes of trials rather than looking for impact all the time. And if we start to focus much more on explaining, we might get a better insight into how the world works, for which we are designing all our interventions. Innovation, innovative approaches. One of the things that came out and everybody agreed with, but we didn't have time to talk about, was communication. This was about communication, this session. And we did not have a communication specialist on our team. We have not talked about it during this whole program, but we're all talking about communication. The whole idea is about we have communicated properly and we understand and we know exactly who we've communicated with, but in fact, communications has changed considerably from just sending out messages. It's a much more interesting, innovative field now, and it's certainly missing, and it's potentially innovative in the way it can transform programs. And cross-sectional partnerships are development two development partners who were at the meeting made it very clear that everything they do is through partners. And when you do something through a partner, you establish a partner and you know very well why you have selected that partner. And the sense was that they will work, they will do whatever if you can convince them of the value of their work. And potentially the higher up you are, the more useful those partners are in a sense, because you've got policy on your side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christine. And thank you for pointing out the deficits we have in terms of communication. There is a communication specialist from Green Inc., and he will help us with the follow-up in terms of communications. That leads us to breakout session number 8, and I call on Jack Trinikens, who managed with his group. Yeah? Probably it's easier if you speak from here.
Okay.
And I work this for you if you like.
Yeah.
Don't know
Okay.
how they did it, but they did a PowerPoint.
Yeah, we didn't all make all these slides in the 10 minutes we had. Some of the slides were already presented at the breakout session. So just to give you an idea of what we were looking for, please. The objective was exploration of value chain approaches in health and nutrition research. So how can we make use of these approaches? And so the sub-objectives are to enhance our insights in the applicability of concepts, methodologies and tools. And of course, and that's the main aim of this session, to make a first step towards the design of research topics or research agenda in this area. We didn't come that far, but we made some steps at least. We had a very good session, very nice presentations. Lauren Univer giving an overview of the area, very insightful, and 3 case study presentations. One on food safety, which is really an area where value chain research can be used, or value chain approach can be used. Ellen de Brouwer about the introduction of orange sweet potatoes in rural Mozambique, and there how to market these new products was a key issue in value chain research, related to value chain research. And we had Jason Donovan on leveraging fruit value chains for better diets in Lima, who looked at how to link supply of fruits to demand of fruits in the city. To give a short picture of a value chain, and I'll show this also in the session, so again, we didn't make this in the last minutes. A value chain is in fact a value chain network where you have different stages. For example, here we have farmers, intermediaries, traders or processors and consumers, and there are interactions between these different stages. And sometimes there are interactions between, for example, farmers and traders, processors and farmers and consumers. So you can have all kind of vertical relationships. Beside that, you have horizontal relationships, meaning that in every stage you have a number of partners or actors, and these actors also interact, have relationships with each other. Like farmers can be in a farmer cooperative, and for example, traders can be from the same community. Value chains are always embedded in an environment with an infrastructure, with institutions, government, financial institutions, etc., and markets. And here we try to focus at nutritional outcomes. So this was more or less the starting picture of how we started this session. Some areas that we identified between the partners of the session, so the presenters, where progress has been made, was, we have development of a conceptual framework, for example, that one of Rural and Halkes. It's a first nice step in this direction. There are some proof of concepts through results, for example, of the orange sweet potato studies, which was also presented at our session. We have successful value chain approaches, I think I can say that, to management and control of food safety. We have that in developed countries, of course, but now also in developing countries. We also had a presentation on that. And we do have a greater understanding of consumption behavior and ways of influencing behavior. And that, of course, gives an understanding of how the supply chain, the value chain, should react on this, these wishes in the market. Now, going to gaps in knowledge, and there are many gaps in knowledge on value chains. There isn't that much yet in this area of research. And some of the gaps that we identified, and the audience added some of the gaps here, is understanding of determinants of the choices that influence diet quality, but also including how it is influenced by home production, so there the value chain comes in, provenance of local food, market access, habits maybe, prices and income. So we have to look at the broad picture of how a value chain leads to the market. Second point is understanding how nutrient quality is influenced by production and post-harvest handling and processing. Nutrient quality is getting shaped throughout the value chain, stage by stage. An interesting point discussed before in other sessions and mentioned by several speakers, also plenary I remember, is the long chain versus short chain discussion. Longer chains, are they less safe? Do they produce better nutrition or not? We don't know that. Very important is that we should build evidence from success stories and how success stories related to how to create markets, because market orientation is one of the key issues in value chain analysis. And then, of course, the next one, finding rigorous evidence about improvement in nutrition or health around any value chain. We don't have, again, that much evidence. So a lack of value chain research, especially data. We don't have many data to analyze, and lack of pilots. And the last one on this slide is that we need testing models for rewarding improved food safety in markets. So quite a number of gaps on different issues related to value chains and nutrition and health. And this is a very important one, came up in discussion as well, is that we should have backward links between from the value chain to CG research. So how to use value chains in that research, how to link these two. And then for the cross-sectoral partnerships, well, some examples here that we found with the panelists especially. Nutrition, education or healthcare delivery coupled with agricultural extension efforts is an example. Use of risk analysis, which we do a lot already, may lead to policy setting. So then multi-stakeholders will be involved. We had a nice example from ILWI, participatory risk assessment. Very important maybe is bringing economic argument to policymakers. Policymakers want to see data, want to see economics. So, and we don't have many data, so we should work on that. Then the cross-sectoral partnership on health and eco-health. Paying attention to economics again, and private sector involvement was also one of the key issues coming up in the discussion. You have to have, if you want to develop a value chain, you have to have a business proposition. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Okay, thank you, Bas.
Thank you, Jacques. That leads us to our group number 9, and that has the longest name, Farm Size, Urbanization and the Links from Agriculture to Nutrition and Health. And Agnes Andersen will do the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is working, I think. I should start off by saying that this session was born out of a foresight study, or a set of foresight studies for the ISPC on urbanization and changes in farm size. So the links to health and nutrition were sometimes a bit tenuous. But I'll start off just by summarizing first the discussion in very broad terms, and then also deal with the different questions that we raised. So basically, we identified, well, some major changes that are likely to occur as a result of demographic changes as well as economic changes. And the first one is changes in supply chains resulting from urbanization, leading to a lack of control, basically, of possibilities of managing the entire supply chain. The second one is spatial polarization as a result of urbanization processes, which may result in that certain areas are pulled into dynamic processes to meet growing urban demands and demand for segmented products of high value, while other areas are left out. So there's this trend of spatial polarization. There's also a trend of shrinking farm sizes, as well as in some areas, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, also actually falling productivity rather than rising productivity. And moreover, more inequality within the smallholder sector, especially in Africa. So we discussed the implications of these changes for nutrition and health, and perhaps more importantly, how to handle the nutrition of the populations that may actually be impoverished by these processes, whether they're in rural or in urban areas. So what should the role of the CG system be in this context, and what can the role of agricultural research and development be in this context? So that was the broad framework for our discussion. Now we then turn to the specific questions to discuss where progress has been made in recent years. And we would like to suggest that there's more data on both agriculture and health and nutrition available. There's much more data available than there used to be. It's also geocoded and more detailed. There's also an increase in convergence of understanding of patterns of production and how this is, better of understanding of linkages between agriculture and population. And in that sense, the diagnostics are much better. There's also simply a better toolbox, a better and bigger toolkit in terms of the available measurements on nutrition and health, and breeding tools have become more specific. So there's a wider variety and a better range of tools available. But we also identified a number of gaps, and perhaps the gaps were what came to steer the discussion was how little we do know. So the first one would be that the linkages between population, productivity, and health and nutrition need to be better understood. While there needs to be a better integrated assessment of the available data. So some of the participants mentioned the vast number of surveys being carried out using varied types of methodologies and various sites, but this needs to be better assessed and understood, the available data. There's also a research gap in terms of food consumption at the household level. How does food consumption play out at the household level? Why are some very poor households relatively food secure while others are not? How is food divided and consumed within households, and so on? And also there's a need for understanding the effects or the linkages between agricultural income and its relationship to nutrition outcomes. And finally, then, the overarching question again is, what are the nutrition implications and health implications of urbanization? These are simply not known. Let's see. Now, turning to partnerships, there is some joint analysis going on. There was a mention of the World Bank and IFPRI working together, merging data sets. There seems to be a more systems integrative approach emerging. There are also examples of partnerships between the private sector and the food industry, where the food industry is sort of reverting to the supply chain and reaching out directly to smallholder producers. The introduction of ICT has also meant or led to private sector partnerships, pointing to the importance of extension and market information systems mediated in this way. And then oh, I forgot. More nutrition specific. That was on the advances already being made. Was more nutrition specific interventions in agricultural areas of crop technologies and so on. So the notes are a bit messy. So for the scientific approaches, we identified, well, basically, again, the overarching questions are two. What do we do with the small farms that are being sidelined? How do we ensure the nutrition and health outcomes of the poor smallholders and the urban poor? And we identified a number of different areas for research, not just research gaps as such. And one would be political science research related to vested interests in supply chains, and the role of the influence of large multinational companies, and how this prevents the progress of or establishment in practice of well-known scientific recommendations in terms of preventing incommunicable diseases. The second aspect would be the food safety systems in the light of changing supply chains and how they need to be adapted to a growing or a loss of control, really, and the longer nature of food safety systems that may cover or move increasingly towards urban areas and towards urban end consumers, and how to deal with those aspects. There's also a need for enhancing diagnostics, with the mention of the agrobiome being sort of what do you say? Establishing the agrobiomes. And finally, the idea of optimizing farming systems, not for productivity or for production primarily, but for nutrition. That there may be a case for an approach where farming systems research is geared towards optimizing nutrition rather than production alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we turn to breakout session number 10. It will be presented by the coordinator Yuri Tanimichi, and she also has a PowerPoint presentation.
Good afternoon. I just want to give thanks to my co-organizer Linda Fulponi and the 4 presenters that we had at our session. Me personally, I attended in the first breakout session the policy breakout group that Bhavani was organizing, and then I attended this one, and it was a really good mix because the first one focused on the economic implications of policy interventions, and this one that we worked on really focused on kind of the project level economic implications. So, areas where progress has been made. What was identified was a group that there has been very serious attention paid by the agriculture community on a systematic conceptualization of food systems to understand links between agriculture and nutrition. And I think the emphasis was on the conceptualization. We made a lot of progress on concepts, and now we need to take it more to the analysis and design. Knowledge gaps, we identified quite a bit. The first one came up in the policy session as well. A lot of our serious econometricians felt that the current data collected from food consumption surveys, etc., are so heterogeneous that it's very difficult to do any kind of comparative studies. So there was a plea to have some kind of harmonized protocol for collecting food security and consumption data. We had some terrific presentations about small fish and African traditional vegetables from our presenters. And really, we had a big, lively discussion about that's terrific. We have these successful boutique operations, but how do you bring it to scale? And how do you sustain the success after the project has closed? And I think the thinking in the group was that this is not being done very systematically. So occasionally there are great pilots that scale up, but oftentimes there are other great pilots that don't get discovered or fail in the process of being scaled up. I guess I shouldn't go through all of them in the interest of time. I will only say maybe the last one. This comes up later on, but there is a feeling that we focused a lot on the supply side, and there needs to be a much more stronger focus on demand analysis, which includes markets, how the market conditions are for nutritious foods, or cultural taboos, which may inhibit the consumption of certain healthy foods. So, examples of partnerships. We heard the great story of World Fish in Bangladesh, where they are involved in a research pilot innovative research of a pilot innovative project. And I understand that it's currently being scaled up. We heard that I think Feed the Future was going to take this at a much broader national scale. So that seems like a very sensible approach for the CG centers to do some evidence-based innovative pilots and then to kind of pass it on to donors or national governments for scaling up. There was sort of a discussion about how the CG in its current form, despite the reform, it's sort of a big system and people tend to work in their commodity focus. So I think there was a sort of a request for the A4NH team to sort of play a coordinating role in forming multi-sectoral teams that go beyond commodities or go beyond just agricultural expertise. Innovative scientific approaches. The first one, it came in the context of livestock. One of our, I think, FAO colleague talked about how we should not be so dogmatic and think that we can only talk about smallholder farmers. Sometimes there is a role for medium-sized or large-sized farmers to play in supporting poor people. So to be a little bit more open about acknowledging the role of medium or large farmers is actually quite difficult for us, I think, for many of us, because we are just sort of not used to saying that very loudly, but that we thought was an innovative approach. And the second one is sort of the same, just general shift from kind of this traditional production-dominated research agenda to a much stronger focus on consumption, whether in the urban or rural areas, is kind of becoming stronger in the CG system. Another thing is sort of using its comparative advantage as a major global public research institute to do some long-term projections to underlie longer-term research agendas. So while the rest of the world is scurrying around trying to solve problems and troubleshoot, I mean, CG is in a really good position to do some foresight work and develop some longer-term research agendas. And finally, we talked a little bit in the context of dairy about that we all heard about yesterday about how women's involvement in dairy has in some cases led to a decrease in breastfeeding practices. So our suggestion was to be very explicit about addressing unintended negative consequences and in coming up with a net benefit, as opposed to sort of trying to sell the agriculture approach in improving nutrition. So to have a more kind of balanced approach, realizing that at times there are negative impacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.